This is the Venerable Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche, seminar entitled Meditation in the Three Yanas, held at Naropa Institute in Boulder, Colorado. This is talk number 9, July 12, 1979. This is an ARP digital remaster made November 2007.
Good evening. Tonight is being the last of this class, of the first session of the Institute. We try to summarize and also try to go slightly beyond that in discussing a little bit of the Vajrayana principles in the practice of meditation. The basic logic, so to speak, of the person can attain enlightenment is based on an understanding of that we have what is known as Buddha nature in us, basic goodness in us, and because of that we are capable of practicing meditation at all, and because of that, in fact, we are here by certain coincidence that you decide to come along, and we decide to provide such space for you to be here and be taught and studied and learn. So there is a general sense of goodness which is inspired by enlightened vision, which brought us together here. And out of that, because we are individual Buddha nature, which allows you to be here and learn to respond and practice. And because of that, we then begin with the shamatha discipline of the Hinayana tradition, training the mind thoroughly, fully, and in turn developing what's known as mindfulness with that. So you learned how to relate with your world and yourselves so that we are able to relate with our basic world. To begin with a good posture, breath, and so forth. And from that basic Hinayana discipline of shamatha and mindfulness practice, we expand further and we begin to look into the discriminating awareness wisdom principle, which is inspired by the shamatha discipline, and we are led into what's known as vipassana. Which allows us to expand further so that everyday life situation is looked at as a total practice situation altogether. So nothing is missing, and from sublime to ridiculous, that every activity, brushing your teeth to whatever, to attainment of enlightenment, all the activities are connected with the general situation that nothing is regarded as completely obsolete, or nothing is regarded as particularly ordinary and avoidable. And everything is included in that. Your life is total world of practice situation altogether. And after that, we begin to evolve further by developing a sense of warmth and space to oneself. One begin to trust oneself and develop a notion of trust and warmth, which we talked about, taking examples of one's own personal mother and how she did it to you and how you felt about her. And similarly, we can expand warmth and kindness to ourselves to begin with, which is a Maitri concept. Out of that, it develops a Karuna concept, compassion, and dealing with others in the same way, so that we begin to feel gentle and genuine in the Mahayana vision. With that one learned how to exchange oneself to other, so that you are capable of taking other people's pain and in turn sharing your pleasure and goodness to others. so that you could be of service to the rest of the world, the rest of the humanity. And with that particular training, we then go slightly beyond that as well, which is the third yana of the Vajrayana principle. And the Vajrayana, Vajra meaning indestructible, adamantine, literally indestructible idea of that one begin to learn to give up one's ego altogether. And then one's ego is completely overcome, so to speak. That egomaniac and egohood of holding one's own territory is overcome by the Mahayana practice of discipline, of compassion, karuna. At that point, the true idea of absolute bodhicitta, absolute benevolence is entered into your heart. And with that particular situation, then we begin to develop that indestructibility in some sense, because for the very fact we have nothing to lose. We have lost our ego already, which is maybe quite a lot. And because of that, we have nothing to lose. Therefore, we begin to feel indestructible. And indestructibility is based on some sense of appreciation and a gratification of the teachings. Reason why that is so is because that we begin to feel that our burden is our ego all along, which we carry along with us wherever we go, even if we manage to shake off our nagging wife or nagging husband or nagging grandparents or placed with a bad memory. But wherever we go, still we carry our own nagging ego all along, which is the analogous of a tortoise carrying its own shell all along. So when we begin to unshell that particular tortoise, we become very naked, at the same time indestructible in some sense of appreciation. That teaching and the way that showed to us from the teaching, by the teaching, that we feel so thankful that we are given a new dimension of our lives, that we can so bravely step out of our little nest. And yet at the same time there is some sense of a greater vision, and you are finally exposed to a greater panorama. And therefore you'll be thankful to your teacher. And the reason why you're thankful to your teacher is not so much of the teacher is purely a hero worship situation, but because the teacher represents the teachings already. And because we trust the teaching, therefore teacher comes along with it naturally. At that point, the teacher is able to, from the Vajrayana point of view, by the way, at that point, teacher is able to transmit the fullest of the lineage heritage to you as student. When the student is opened up completely and sort of like a matching fundraising concept, that if you have $50,000 and you go to somebody, do you have $50,000 to match to raise our fund? So in turn we make 80,000 altogether. So that kind of idea that you come along so far because you opened up, and then therefore your teacher is also able to do so and work with it, open that much, that level. Not necessarily the teacher is bargaining, but the teacher reflects his or her warmth to you, and the student has opened that much, so therefore there's no problem of misunderstanding or anything like that at all. So the situation becomes very clear and open, and there is some kind of openness takes place. And the moment when the teacher's mind and your mind is met, it is called the meeting of the mind. At that point, what's known as some sort of flash takes place of mutual luminosity And that mutual luminosity is what is known as the Vajra nature in the Vajrayana point of view. And planting greater enlightenment, greater Vajra nature in one's heart. And at the same time, of course, the teacher and the student are bound together with their mutual commitment, which is called a Samaya principle in the Vajrayana language. Samaya principle is that which bound student and teacher together, that they are connected, they are committed together until the student is actually able to experience the fullest awakened point, awakened state of mind altogether. And that point also, student is not necessarily delivered from samsara, but still student is on the path. At that particular path, where the student can actually transmute their neurosis into wisdom, like poison turning into a medicine, the concept of transmutation, the concept of lead turning into gold, the alchemistic concept. At that point, because there is so much trust and understanding and devotion, therefore one's neurosis no longer become attack or hang-up. There will be neurosis nonetheless, but that neurosis becomes a working base. And the energy of the neurosis being retained, the neurosis of the neurosis being overcome. So we begin to learn to separate from the energy of the neurosis, which could be an expression of one's Buddha nature. In any case, there is a awakened point of view, and there is the energy of neurosis could be aggression, which can turn into just basic energy, passion, which can turn into just the basic warmth, and ignorance, which can be turned into just basic stability. So the neurosis of aggression of anger is overcome, neurosis of passion of attachment is overcome, neurosis of ignorance of stupidity is overcome. So that kind of neurosis, therefore there's no particular problem in dealing with the neurosis, and the neurosis is not regarded as a big deal because of your basic devotion and the basic warmth. And the student begin to realize, nevertheless, the merits of the beginner's practice of shamatha and vipassana, which led us to that particular situation. So we can't just jump into that particular level right away, but we have to go through a process that way. The Vajrayana tradition is not necessarily presenting a sudden enlightenment. But on the other hand, it could be regarded as a sudden enlightenment. But that sudden enlightenment is based on a gradual enlightenment to begin with. Once a gradual process is taking place, then sooner or later you have a sudden enlightenment. Well, analogies to that is that when you are 60 years old and celebrate your birthday, the birthday of a self and 60 years old is sudden, because suddenly you have a birthday that you are 60 years old. But such thing can only happen if you've gone through the first year, second year, and so forth. So it's a process, a gradual process. Then there is a recognition and a flash, which is very real. And there's no cheating involved or no deception involved. Everything becomes very genuine at that point. The suddenness is quite shocking. So I think that's general, roughly speaking, basic process that from the beginner's point of view until the final situation of a journey takes place in the three under principles. And not confusing you further, maybe we could have discussions on that.
Rinpoche, I was wondering if you could say what a enlightened person's experience of their body is.
Well, I don't see particular differences necessarily. Probabilities are different than purely the ideal concept of living on a health diet.
On a what?
Health diet.
Oh.
Well, I think body neurosis can overcome, so that body does not become the dictator to your mind, which usually happens even when we sit. If you have an ache in the back and you feel bad about your sitting practice, you want to walk out or do something like that. So the body does not become that much of a big deal. And there is some sense of overcoming body attachment to begin with. And also, it is not like, we are not talking about when you attain light, when you feel blissful in the body necessarily. There is a story about the Buddha when he was, his foot was stuck with a thorn and he felt pain. And there's a long discussion about that. And one day Buddha had a headache and there was a long discussion about that. So the body situation still goes on, obviously. But there is no neurosis attached to it. And I think it depends on the level of situations of the latest, the 20th century man has more body neurosis, obviously. Whereas if we compare with the medieval people or civilizations like that, like in my country, Tibet, where we come from, we live in a very harsh world, very severe winter and a very difficult place to walk around. You always have to hike, walk, and you have to work for your life that way. But nonetheless, people don't feel they should complain to anybody. But in the 20th century man, with every comfort is involved, if there's little tingle of pain, corner of your ear, you always have to go to a doctor and try to take aspirin the right way. So that kind of situation doesn't exist with enlightened attitude. That doesn't necessarily mean to say that you become insensitive to your body, you neglect your body, but your body neurosis does not affect your basic state of mind, so able to overcome. And that is actually the whole idea of learn how to die properly. And like the Tibetan Book of the Dead idea of that, how to depart from your body, is that your body is not regarded as the and only messenger for your state of mind, so you have some sense of overcoming that little cocoon that you're living in, so-called body.
Rinpoche, could you talk a little bit about our attitude towards the thoughts that keep rising? Supposedly a feeling of warmth towards oneself is supposed to develop, but I keep finding that the more thoughts I have and the less I'm able to follow my breath, the more sort of despair or anger I feel against myself. And so just the opposite seems to be happening.
With your sitting practice you're talking about?
Pardon me?
Are you talking about with your sitting practice? Yes?
Yes.
Well, sitting practice is an interesting one, usually, connected with your warmth to yourself. Particularly at the beginning, because of your sitting practice, your mind is beginning to become more and more clear, because that you are dealing with your subconscious thoughts, and you're coming back to your technique, which actually does a tremendous sorting out process. So you begin to become more and more sensitive all the time. And therefore you begin to feel you're reacting much more so than usual to sense perceptions. That's the usual starting point. But that doesn't necessarily mean to say that there is no starting point of developing a warmth to yourself. The idea is that you are no longer your own enemy, basically speaking. You might have your little strange way of dealing with yourselves, which is all right. And I think there is humorous part of yourself, which could be starting point of developing loving kindness to yourself. That your big deal is no longer big deal. You may be very sensitive, but still, you could always return and look at yourself and accept yourself as you are. I think we can't theorize on that, but you have to do more practice and find out more. And in fact, doing such as like Datun of intensive sitting practice for a whole month would be very helpful. So you go through a process of the first part is hating yourself, second part is questioning, and finally you begin to accept yourself, which is go through a process. And it's like nobody's really properly married to themselves properly, let alone somebody else. So you have to go through that. How to learn to love yourself is quite an interesting education.
Thank you.
Rinpoche, just some thoughts on action versus aggression, or action and aggression. It seems that with action from meditation, what have you, my impression is one of spontaneity, okay? Whereas with aggression, it seems to be something more of a planned out, or let me choose the correct words here, more of something that's more of a push effort instead of just a natural inclination along from one action to the next. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more on that, on the relationship between the two and how meditation does affect action and aggression.
Well, I think both are the same thing. Aggression is action, action is aggression in some sense. The aggression might have a more blind factor because you're angry, therefore that you don't see any activities of clarity and logical reasoning, which both saying the same thing. And your guess is as good as mine. I think in more practice, you see, what we are trying to do here is not so much of analyzing everybody out so that you can do exactly what you wanted properly and fully, but we are starting with ourselves, that piling up lots of questions, and those questions being slowly answered by lots of sitting practice. So how to deal with oneself becomes a natural process. It's like a growing process, that if you feel cold, somehow or other you learn to put on more clothes. If you feel hot, somehow or other you learn to take off your clothes, which would be not a particular product of your study in the university or taking a course in the Naropa Institute, but it's a natural process that we always do. And similarly, spiritually, you learn to do that. So what we're trying to do here is that you learn to develop your own instinct and your own skillful means. As long as you begin to learn how to sit properly, fully according to the prescriptions that be presented to you. So out of that, you learn how to deal with yourself naturally. So that's the idea, is help yourself rather than a welfare case.
I have a question about the three levels you were talking about. The final level, when you had an outer teacher to enlighten you. Why is that necessary, and how does that contrast with what happened to the Buddha in his enlightenment?
Well, that's why we have a Buddha, in fact, in some sense, that he is our first teacher. Because he was his own teacher, therefore we could follow his examples. The reason why we follow his example is because he is not a Buddhist.
May I ask another question?
Yes?
What is your opinion of Western spiritual practice?
Which kind? You're talking about Christianity or Judaism or?
what we call the Western tradition, which has to do with the Christian mystic, the Kabbalist.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think definitely, as long as there's any element of contemplative discipline is involved, that seems to be the best of all. I have a lot of dealings with Eastern Orthodox and the Catholic disciplines when I was in England, and I haven't had a great deal of relationship with the Kabbalistic traditions, particularly, except those English groups who are supposedly studying Kabbalistic philosophy, which is questionable. But I think, you see, once you begin to learn to sit or practice that way of very simple discipline, whether you're coming from theistic world or non-theistic world, that you begin to become finally non-theistic people, if I may say so. You begin to lose your God, and God doesn't mean anything, or means a lot, on the other hand. And you begin to reduce everything into that, the very simple and very basic situations altogether. And I think that has tremendous merit, obviously. And in fact, in the Naropa Institute, we try to develop what's called the yogic tradition of spiritual discipline, which is a branch of the Buddhist study department, is that we're trying to develop some kind of understanding or studies made on the contemplative traditions of the world altogether, so that we could somehow work together that way, to appreciate each other that way very much.
Rinpoche, did you say we can separate the neurosis from our passion, aggression, and ignorance? I heard you say something about separating the neurosis, and I missed the last part of it.
Well, basic point is that there is a passion, aggression, and ignorance, which are generally known as a neurosis, because there is a basically factor which provide us with a tremendous pain, right? But in the Vajrayana discipline, that those are not regarded as a pure neurosis. There is the enlightened aspect of it, as well as the confused aspect of it. So with the Vajrayana discipline, you can separate them. The energy of the neurosis are wisdom. The other aspect of neurosis is pain and confusion, samsaric thing. One can separate them, yes.
And that is done through Vajrayana practices.
Vajrayana practice is, his whole purpose of Vajrayana practice is that alchemistic idea of lead changing into gold.
What about in shamatha practice? Does that
Well,
start
that's
to happen?
preparation towards it.
Right.
Preparation towards it, and one begin to make a relationship with it. In the shamatha discipline practice, you learn how things as they are, and because of vipassana practice, which leads into bodhisattva principle, then you begin to learn to relate with a friendship with your neurosis. Your neurosis is no longer regarded as an attack, and beyond that, you transmute, which is a Vajrayana thing. So there's threefold logic like that.
Thank you.
Rinpoche, in the sadhana you talk about Vajra anger and connect it with an element. What does that have to do with, there was Vajra anger, Vajra passion?
Well, that is the transmuted neurosis. That the wisdom aspect of neurosis, the Vajra anger means the greater anger of energy. Vajra passion is compassion. Same as what we've been talking about.
Could you relate that to the iconography?
Well, you can see peaceful and wrathful deities in iconography which are representing that. You see in the iconographies.
Thank you.
Rinpoche, I was wondering if, when you're communicating with someone, if you're in touch, like with your center, sort of, if you are getting kind of, your body, mind synchronated, and you're in touch with it, and you're talking from a deeper spot, do you automatically hit the deeper spot in the other person because it's coming from that spot in you?
Well, you can, basically speaking. But the other question is how much you are in touch with yourself or imagining. So that's a question. And I think shamatha practice would clear that out, because you begin to learn how to separate imagination and reality. How much you're imagining you're breathing or how much actually you're breathing. And things like that. That's a very good one. Mm-hmm. Well, friends, this seems to be the end of our first session. Happily or sadly, it's happily that we have worked together very well, and we have been able to take some kind of step towards enlightenment, so to speak, awake, sanity. Sadly, because we could study more. And I wish we could have more time and more space, more money to continue greater length. We could go on for years and years without non-stop. But however, that I appreciate very much you as a student and your effort we put into this learning has become very genuine, and I appreciate every one of you very much taking part in this course. And generally speaking, appreciate very much in taking part in the Institute's courses, working with a vision that you might have individual further disciplines who work connected with the arts or science or whatever you might have. And the whole thing turned out to be excellent. And I certainly appreciate very much you as a student audience body that I begin to feel that I was able to transmit what I have to say quite freely, which is a tremendous advantage in presenting the teachings. And thank you very, very much for being here, and appreciate all of you a lot. I love you all. Thank you. Keep on practicing and stay on or come back next year. We have a further feast in years to come. Thank you very much.